McGrath again, talking to you about my textbook, Christian Theology and Introduction. We now come to the 17th chapter. This is all about Christianity and the world religions and deals with the ways in which Christianity tries to make theological sense of the existence and status of other religious traditions. It's an area of Christian theology that was very important during the patristic age and has re-emerged as significant during the last 2 centuries. Now, early Christian theologians were intensely aware they lived in a religiously plural environment in the Roman Empire. So how could they explain and make sense of these other religions and worldviews? How could they locate them on a theological map? And during this formative period in Christian theology, we see a number of what we might call theologies of other religious traditions beginning to emerge within the Christian churches. Now, the need for this kind of thinking diminished significantly with the emergence of Christendom during the Middle Ages. Western Europe was an essentially Christian region, and relatively few Christian theologians now had direct contact with people of other faiths. A rare example of a region of Europe in which Christianity, Islam and Judaism exist alongside one another is found in 15th century Spain. But in general, there was little pressure to offer Christian accounts of other religious traditions because this was simply not a pressing issue. However, the great age of European global exploration made theologians aware of other religious traditions, above all in India and China, and as a result stimulated what we might call a Christian theology of other religions. And these pressures have now developed further as a result of global migration during the 20th century, through which many non-Christian religious traditions have become numerically significant presences in Western context. The British philosopher of religion John Hick, for example, has described how his personal friendships with members of other faiths in Birmingham, which is England's second city, stimulated his own pluralist theology of religions. So in this chapter, we consider various theological approaches to other religious traditions. And I think you'll enjoy this because it will give you a sort of map to help you work out where you would position yourselves. One of the questions raised at the beginning of this chapter is whether the relation of Christianity and other religions can be established independent of some committed perspective, or whether we need a committed informing lens of some kind to answer that question. Now, some of the approaches noted in this chapter are explicitly Christian, but at several points we note the importance of non-Christian models of religion. For example, the sociological approach offered by Karl Marx and the psychoanalytical approach offered by Sigmund Freud. And these are not neutral empirical accounts. They are very strongly committed to certain theoretical assumptions. Both of them, for example, assume that atheism is right and therefore religion is wrong. So we have, if you like, a bias from the outset. But nevertheless, they're interesting, and so they're included in this chapter. Let's look at his topics in more detail. The most obvious question that needs to be addressed is what the word religion actually means. To explore the theme of Christianity and other religions requires some understanding of how religion is to be defined. And this actually is rather difficult, as religion is really a cultural category. Early Christianity did not regard itself as a religion in the Roman sense of that term. However, as Christianity became increasingly significant in imperial Roman culture, it came under pressure to conform to Roman expectations of what a religion should be. And some scholars feel that Christianity may have lost something of its distinct ethos as a result of this process of cultural assimilation. So we begin by reflecting on the problem of defining religion. For example, evident in the Enlightenment view that Christianity represented the corruption of some original religion of nature. The idea was very influential during the 18th century, for example, in English deism, which saw religions as distortion of a simple faith in a creator God. It was all about religions like Christianity imposing their institutional authority on the worship of nature. And we find this in Matthew Tyndall's very influential work of 1730, Christianity as Old as Creation, or the Gospel, a republication of the religion of nature. Yet 3 of the most influential approaches to understanding the nature of religion emerged during the 19th and early 20th century, from the German-speaking world. The German philosopher Ludwig Feuerbach argued that the supernatural mysteries of religion are based upon quite simple natural truths. His point is that human beings naturally objectify or project their feelings of independence or love and create the idea of God, so that God and religion are human inventions based on human desires and fears. And the German political philosopher Karl Marx took this approach further, agreeing with Feuerbach that religion was a human construction, but arguing that Feuerbach failed to appreciate that this process of religious construction was shaped by social realities. And this general approach is summed up in his well-known statement that religion is the opium of the people. It's all about religion being a construction which, in effect, offers us consolation in the midst of an alienating and hostile world. Marx argued that radical social change would remove the cause of religion, and hence it would naturally fade away. We then move on to consider the Austrian psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud. And Freud argued that religion was an illusion, a wish fulfillment, whose origins lay simply within the human subconsciousness rather than in some transcendent reality. And for Freud, religious ideas were simply fulfillments of our deepest desires. He didn't mean they were deliberate deceptions. It's simply ideas that arise from within the human unconsciousness as it seeks to fulfill its deepest yearnings and longings. Now, all of these approaches have been criticized because of their strongly reductionist tendencies. They're clear examples, in my view, of attempts to explain religion from the perspective of a controlling narrative of worldview. But other writers try to avoid this. For example, Emil Durkheim tries to do justice to religion without attempting to impose some kind of ideology upon it. But we haven't really looked at specifically Christian approaches yet. So in this chapter, we look at J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, both of whom see religion as arising from humanity's intrinsic capacity, which is grounded in bearing God's image, to tell stories that mirror our divine origin. Yet, while Tolkien and Lewis both see religion as a kind of positive thing, other theologians have seen it as dangerous or unhelpful. For example, Karl Barth and Dietrich Bonhoeffer both see the category religion as a human invention and something that is negative. They don't regard belief in God as fictitious. Rather, they're worried about the category of religion. Barth, for example, sees religion as a purely human construction, and Bonhoeffer talked about the emergence of a religionless Christianity. In other words, a faith which is not based on natural human religiosity, but upon God's self-revelation in Christ. Now, you remember in an earlier chapter we looked at the resurgence of interest in the doctrine of the Trinity. And actually that has been a very important perspective for thinking about the relationship of theology, Christianity and other faiths. Many writers like Gavin DeCosta and Amos Young have developed Trinitarian approaches to other religions, which aim to understand both religions and their ideas within a Trinitarian framework. And I think you'll find that really very interesting. We then come to a substantial section of this chapter which deals with three broad approaches to other religious traditions that have become very influential in recent discussion. And these are usually described using the following labels: the exclusivist or perhaps particularist approach, the inclusivist approach, and the pluralist approach. And this chapter analyzes and evaluates each of these positions, making sure you have a good account of at least one of its major representatives. For example, exclusivism, or sometimes particularism, holds that only those who hear and respond to the Christian gospel can be saved. And this position is found in many Christian writings, perhaps most influentially in the works of the Dutch Protestant theologian Hendrik Kramer in his 1938 work, The Christian Message in a Non-Christian World. More recent expositions of this particular position are found with the British writers Stephen Neale and Leslie Newbigin, both of whom spent a substantial part of their working lives as Christian bishops in India. And Neale, for example, saw no tension between the affirmation of the unique status of Christianity and having respect for other religious traditions. The inclusivist approach holds that Christianity allows other religions to be seen as important milestones along the road to the Christian faith. And these ideas can be seen as developing in India during the 19th century at the time of British occupation, as increasing numbers of British theologians became familiar with Hinduism at first hand. And they began to, in effect, reflect on the relationship between Hinduism and Christianity, and this fulfillment theory saw other faiths as pointing beyond themselves to their fulfillment in Christianity. Now, the Jesuit writer Karl Rahner takes this approach, arguing that the saving grace of God can be known through non-Christian religious traditions. And Rahner introduced what I think is a rather unhelpful term, anonymous Christians, to refer to those who've experienced divine grace without actually knowing it. The Second Vatican Council followed Rahner in affirming that rays of divine truth could be found in other religious traditions, but nevertheless insisting that only Christianity had the capacity to save people. And the third approach is pluralism. The basic feature of this approach is that each religion has a distinctive yet equally valid grasp of some ultimate spiritual reality. Now, some religions call this reality God, others talk about it in more mystical or even atheistic terms. So for this reason, a writer like John Hick will talk about ultimate reality, or the real, rather than referring to God. Now, Hick, I mentioned earlier, basically developed his ideas in the English city of Birmingham, which was home to major Islamic and Hindu communities. And this led him to think of Christianity and other faiths as grasping different aspects of the complex reality of God. For Hick, all religions lead to the same God, so that Christianity has no special access to God, who is universally available through all religious traditions. Now, there's a lot more to say about all of these. I think you'll find this chapter really interesting. I hope you'll find that it opens up ways of thinking which you may find helpful as you explore this question of the relationship of Christianity and other religious traditions. So we're coming now to the end of this series of presentations, and we're going to turn now in our final presentation to look at the final chapter of this book, which is called Last Things. I look forward to introducing you to eschatology in the next presentation. Thank you so much for listening.